When people talk about the golden age of MMORPGs in the Philippines, one game almost always comes up first. Ragnarok Online. Ragnarok na naman. Back in the early 2000s, it wasn't uncommon to walk into an internet cafe and see entire rows of computers filled with players grinding in Pion Cave, hunting cards in Frontera Field, or preparing for another War of Emperium. Ragnarok wasn't just popular, it was a phenomenon. It became part of gaming culture not only in the Philippines but throughout Southeast Asia. Friendships were formed, guilds became families, and countless hours were spent chasing rare drops. So when Gravity announced the sequel, expectations were through the roof. This was supposed to be the next evolution of Ragnarok, the game that would carry the franchise into the future. Instead, Ragnarok Online 2 became one of the most disappointing MMORPG sequels of its generation. Today, we're looking back at Ragnarok Online 2 and exploring exactly why it failed to become the successor fans wanted. To understand why Ragnarok Online 2 struggled, we have to understand why the original was so successful. Released in 2002, Ragnarok Online stood out from every other MMO on the market. Its art style was unique. Characters were represented by charming 2D sprites while the environments were rendered in 3D. The music was memorable, the world felt alive, and perhaps most importantly, the game encouraged social interaction. Leveling wasn't always easy. Many classes relied on parties. Guilds mattered. Players naturally formed communities. You weren't just playing an MMO, you were living in a virtual world. The game also featured one of the most addictive progression systems ever created. Rare cards could also completely change your build. Powerful equipment required dedication. Every drop had value. Every monster had purpose. Even after reaching maximum level, players always had another goal waiting for them. This is the environment Ragnarok Online 2 was expected to build upon. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. Development on Ragnarok Online 2 began during a period when MMORPGs were rapidly evolving. Developers across the industry were chasing larger worlds, better graphics, and more cinematic experiences. Gravity wanted Ragnarok Online 2 to feel modern, but in doing so, they made a critical mistake. They forgot what made Ragnarok special. The first version of Ragnarok Online 2, known as the Gate of the World, looked dramatically different from the original. The iconic classes were gone. The gameplay was completely different. The atmosphere felt unfamiliar. Even longtime Ragnarok players struggled to recognize the game as part of the same franchise. Rather than feeling like a continuation of Ragnarok, it felt like an entirely different MMO that happened to share the same name. Fans were confused. Some were disappointed. Others were simply uninterested. Reception in Korea was poor and the game quickly ran into trouble. The situation became so bad that Gravity made a drastic decision. They essentially scrapped the original version and started over. Imagine spending years developing a sequel only to throw most of it away and rebuild from scratch. Because that's what exactly happened. The rebooted version eventually became known as Ragnarok Online 2, Legend of the Second. This was the version most international players would eventually experience. On paper, it looked promising. Classic classes returned. The world once again featured familiar locations and monsters. Pourings were back. Many beloved Ragnarok elements returned. For a moment, fans believed Gravity had learned from its mistakes. But new problems soon emerged. One of the biggest criticisms was that Ragnarok Online 2 felt generic. By the time it launched, the MMORPG genre had changed dramatically. Games like World of Warcraft had established a formula that many developers followed. Quest hubs, linear progression, dungeon matchmaking, tank healer and DPS roles. Ragnarok Online 2 embraced many of these systems. The problem wasn't that these mechanics were bad. The problem was that countless other MMORPGs were already doing them better. Players entered RO2 expecting a modern Ragnarok. Instead, many found what felt like another standard MMO. The game was competent, it worked, but it rarely surprised anyone. And in a crowded market, being merely competent isn't enough. Another major issue was the combat system. Combat in the original Ragnarok wasn't necessarily revolutionary, but it had a unique rhythm. Players built specialized characters and experimented with unusual setups. The card system added incredible depth. A quick, simple equipment change could completely alter your build. In Ragnarok Online 2, combat felt more conventional. Abilities looked flashy, encounters were functional, but many players felt that character customization lacked the creativity and freedom that made the original so memorable. Instead of creating wildly different builds, many players ended up following similar paths. That reduced one of the biggest strengths of the Ragnarok franchise. The visual style also created problems. Technically speaking, Ragnarok Online 2 looked better than its predecessor. The graphics were fully 3D, the environments were more detailed, character models were modernized, but something was lost in the transition. The original Ragnarok possessed a timeless charm. Its sprites had personality. Its world felt distinct. Even today, screenshots of Ragnarok Online are instantly recognizable. Ragnarok Online 2 looked attractive enough, but it lacked that same identity. Many players describe it as looking like every other fantasy MMO during that era. And that's a dangerous thing for a sequel attached to such a beloved franchise. Perhaps the most important factor was endgame retention. An MMORPG doesn't survive because players enjoy the first few hours. It survives because players stay for years. The original Ragnaroks excelled at this. Players spent months hunting rare cards. Guild rivalries lasted for years. Entire communities formed around War of Emperium. There was always another goal waiting, another rare drop, another guild war, another challenge. Ragnarok Online 2 struggled to create that same feeling. Many players enjoyed the leveling process, but once they reached endgame, there wasn't enough content to keep them invested for the long haul. As players left, communities shrank. As communities shrank, more players left. It's a cycle that has hurt many MMORPGs throughout gaming history, and Ragnarok Online 2 was no exception. Timing also played a huge role. By the early 2010s, competition was fierce. Players had more MMORPG choices than ever before. Why play Ragnarok Online 2 when World of Warcraft was thriving? Why choose it over Guild Wars 2? Why not spend your time in Final Fantasy XIV? Many competing MMOs offered larger budgets, stronger content updates, and more established player bases. RO2 entered the battlefield already dominated by giants, and unfortunately, it lacked the firepower to compete. But perhaps the biggest reason Ragnarok Online 2 failed was something no developer could easily overcome: nostalgia. The original Ragnarok Online wasn't simply a game, it was a moment in time. For many players, especially here in the Philippines, Ragnarok represented childhood memories, internet cafe adventures, school friends, late-night guild wars, the excitement of finding your first valuable card, the joy of finally becoming a second job class. Those experiences were impossible to recreate. Even if Ragnarok Online 2 had been an excellent MMO, it would still have been compared against years of cherished memories. And that's an entirely incredible, difficult battle to win. Today, Ragnarok Online 2 occupies an unusual place in MMORPG history. It wasn't a terrible game, it wasn't broken, it wasn't completely devoid of good ideas. In fact, many players who approached it without expectations found it enjoyable. Its biggest problem was carrying the Ragnarok name, because every decision was measured against one of the most beloved MMORPGs ever created, and more often than not, it came up short. Instead of feeling like the future of Ragnarok, it felt like a different game trying to wear Ragnarok's identity. And in the end, neither longtime fans nor newcomers fully embraced it. Ragnarok Online continues to survive today through classic servers, mobile adaptations, and a loyal fanbase that refuses to let the world of Midgard fade away. But Ragnarok Online 2 serves as an important lesson. A sequel can't rely solely on a famous name. It needs to understand what made the original special in the first place. Unfortunately for Gravity, that lesson came at the expense of one of gaming's most anticipated MMORPG sequels. And that's why Ragnarok Online 2, despite all its potential, ultimately became the sequel that could never escape the shadow of a legend. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this trip down MMORPG memory lane, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own Ragnarok Online memories in the comments below. What was your favorite class? Your favorite hunting spot? And did you ever give Ragnarok Online 2 a chance? We'll see you in the next one. For more content like this and other updates down the line, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.